Hello and welcome to Digital Health Off the Record, your podcast for the latest clinical technology trends, news, and where we share unfiltered insights about everything that's going on. I'm Farrell, and I'm with Optitrial, and my co-host is...
Edwin. So hello again. I'm Edwin Cohen from CM and yeah, looking forward to our third podcast recording this time, Farrell.
Yes, for sure. And we've got the fun, exciting topic of AI in clinical trials and digital health solutions today. So, to set the scene a bit, if you haven't heard of AI, you've probably been asleep for a long while. But I did a poll recently where I was asking what people felt was the future of AI, and it was quite interesting to see that the AI bubble, there was about 64% of people who were AI positive, which included, they thought it was the biggest proportion thought it was the future. Some thought there was, and probably rightly, that there's some areas where it might fall off that it may not have the biggest impact. But then also, interestingly, there was 19% of people who felt that the bubble was about to burst and maybe aren't quite feeling so comfortable with using AI in their day-to-day work today.
Interesting stats.
Hmm. So the thing about AI is that it's what it means changes in cycles. So, like every 4 to 5 years, it has a new definition of what people mean when they say AI. So, if I was to say AI to somebody in the general populace today, probably the first thing that comes to their mind is going to be Gen AI. So, thinking on ChatGPT, Claude, but today we're going to focus on some of the AI foundations as part of this first conversation that we have on AI because it's such a big topic, so broad that it's going to need a few episodes to sort of dig into each individual component in enough detail to make sense. So we're not just skimming over the top of it.
Yeah, definitely. And I would say obviously the topic is inevitable, especially in the real world that we're living in now. And yeah, we've seen the trend within digital health. Before we go into all well, sharing some of the details and insights, Farrell, I want to add just a personal disclaimer though for myself. I'm not considering myself to be an expert in AI. Although the interest is there, I'm using it, but most likely not at the level that the experts are using it. I'm not a developer or a coder, these kind of things, so not from a technical perspective. But it's and then because of that, I like sort of the first step that we're doing now is go back to the foundation and look at sort of what is it really what we're talking about, to also understand future use cases, how we can utilize this in the best possible way. And I think that's really, well, in all cases, I think that's really important. So, as you rightly said, what we're aiming for in this session, to do a little bit of a step back, go through the different levels of AI. And I think we discussed for this session, we will look at not the full scale, but the first couple of levels of AI that starts with machine learning to neural networks, large language models, up to generative and your Gen AI. So now I'm going to do a pop quiz with you, Farrell, and ask you whether you can, in as simple as possible, explain a little bit what the first level of AI is, which we consider the machine learning piece.
Yeah, and I'll try and break it down. So, being a bit of an AI translator to try and break it into a simple fundamental explanation, give an example of like an everyday use for the concept, and then a few like clinical cases and potential risks that come with it as well. So, with machine learning is a sub part of the broader AI bubble. So, it's one specific area. And it's kind of where the old computer algorithm has evolved. So, where previously it would use inputs, get processed specifically to produce outputs, with machine learning, how it works now is that it kind of reverse engineers it to a degree. So it kind of, you give it the system data, and then it will tell you what that data means and be able to process it on itself and train itself on what the rules are of the game. So you don't need to define the middle processing piece. It will decide that for you. And one of those sort of everyday examples is, for example, if your Netflix or your Spotify recommendation list. So based on anything you've done before, and the music or the TV shows you've been watching, it will process that and it will predict based on what other people have done, this is what you will probably like as a consequence of that continuous evolution of what your interests are. And then from the clinical trial perspective, what that can also look like in terms of, matching is looking at patient recruitment kind of solutions. So based on your profile of what your condition is, what your key needs, what trials are available, it can help to learn based off of your criteria, based off of what the trials are available, help to pair you with where you would be the best fit based on inclusion exclusion criteria.
Yeah. Are there any
And
risks associated to this then?
yeah, I think it's kind of, you end up in a bit of you're in your own like ecosystem in your bell jar, so it can, I guess, bias you to what has gone previously. So it's
Mm.
not necessarily going to introduce you to something new that could become your new favorite thing.
Yeah.
So, for example, if all of a sudden you want to, watch a Scandi drama, but you've never done it before, it's not going to appear on your recommendations list unless you actively go out and pursue it of your own accord. So you
Yeah.
can end up in that kind of continuous cycle
Yeah.
of, yeah, bias of I guess, confirming whatever you've done previously and not expanding
Yeah.
the area.
Yeah. Yeah. I think this is especially in the early days of Netflix and these kind of platforms, it's really great. But if you are a bit more open-minded and want to be exposed to other stuff, then it's really hard to get out of that. And I'm going to make it very simple or maybe too simplistic. The advanced algorithms, it's really hard to get rid of that. So yeah,
Mhm.
I see that the downside. So if we then move to the next level, the neural networks, which is closely and very closely related to the large language models. We could combine them, but uh, any sort of definitions from your end? How do we need to read this?
Sure. So with neural networks, they're kind of behind the scenes on the AI and so it's a bunch of different nodes and it's not got any explanations, but it's where fundamentally the network is kind of connecting similar to your brain, where it doesn't really tell you how you get to the answer, but you know what comes next. So based on, it's essentially a statistical model with great PR. So probabilistically, it will connect to whatever the
Yeah.
next most likely possible solution or the best match would be. And that's where it ties into LLM models, which are large language models, in case you don't know. So it utilizes neural network, which it's trained on big chunks of human texts, and it helps define what the relationship
Mm.
between whether it's words, whether it's pixels, if it's using sort of images. So it's a very smart way of finding what's the probability of what the next best piece
Yeah.
should be. And then an example of, large language models. So you're probably using them in your day to day. And if you're not, you need to check them out. So using ChatGPT or
Mm.
Claude, so where you're having a conversation essentially with a computer
Mhm.
program, it is able to interpret using natural language processing what
Mhm.
you're actually saying with context,
Mm.
even though it doesn't necessarily have real context, but it uses that neural network to figure out
Yeah.
this is likely what the answer is based on what you've asked it.
Yeah.
And then in terms of the clinical examples, there's a few different cases. So one of them can be, if you've got an SOP type chatbot where you can interact with a program. If you have questions, what process do I need to follow here? it can look through all of the processes that you have in place in your company, and it will pull out and extract this as the piece of information that person is likely looking
Yeah.
for. And yeah, then in terms of the risks that can come with it, so a big challenge with neural networks in clinical trial settings is having the explainability. So with the neural network, it's pretty much a black box. It doesn't really give you the rhyme or reason as to why you're getting there. So it's not got the best explainable AI elements that might be needed in an audit to be able to tell and justify
Yeah.
this is how I got to the decision, this is what the thought process and so on was. It'll just be here was the output necessarily.
Yeah. The sort of understanding the source information is key. If
Exactly.
I look at ChatGPT nowadays, people ask ChatGPT or utilize ChatGPT as a sort of the advanced search engine to
Mm-hmm.
search things. But as you said, everyone trusts the outcome blindly and doesn't look at the source of information, which is interesting. And like looking up like the best recipe, for example, for food, you only get one answer, whereas there are hundreds of thousands different type of recipes to cook something. And this is something even myself need to keep sort of remind myself about, that this is sort of happening, and hence your source of information is key.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah. The last one, in order not to stay too long and sort of going into the definitions for this session, we are going to look at generative AI or Gen AI, which is the more advanced version, or how do I need to see this?
So generative AI is kind of the consequence of the neural networks and some of the other things we just mentioned. So using your LLM, you're likely asking it to produce something for you. So it's where AI creates something as a consequence. So whether that's, and there's multimodal approaches now, so it can not just create text, but it
Mm.
can create images, code, audio files, whatever you want. This podcast could be AI if we really wanted to after a certain number of episodes, I'm sure. But then some of the more practical cases in your day to day, and again, if you haven't checked them out, definitely worth doing it. You can get images created. So if you use solutions like Midjourney or DALI, you can put in, I want to create an image of a cat in a hat in Pluto,
Yeah.
and it will come up with a suggestion based off what you've asked it to produce. Then quickly going into some of the other elements. So from the clinical side, this can be where you're generating your case study report, your CSR at the end, so of your trial. So it can produce the content that you're going to use for submission based on your study protocol and the data that you've got from the trial, and it can produce all the graphs, data, whatever statistical analysis you're meant to be including. And then the main problem with that, so hopefully it is just producing your first draft and you still have somebody reviewing, because with all of these models, there is that risk of hallucination, which is where basically the AI just makes something up. So it doesn't necessarily get it right all of the time.
Mm.
Sometimes it can, maybe, sprinkle a little of that special seasoning
Yeah.
of let's just make things
Yeah.
interesting and keep you on your toes.
Yeah. Yeah, indeed, and we will get to the risk later on as a separate topic. So, thanks for outlining this, and I always think it's important for people to understand, if we talk about new innovation, if we want to build new things, what it actually is, what it does, as it will have implications on other operational stuff. But before going into the risks and other examples that we need to take into consideration while building these things, let's share some really good examples where AI is helping us. Um, Again, go ahead, make a start, share some of the successes.
And it's definitely the biggest, let's call it revolution in recent times. So whether it's from, content creation, drafting. So if you wanted to help you draft some emails or start creating, presentation base points. It can start doing all that for you and save you a ton of time. Similarly, you mentioned before about SAP chatbots. If you don't know exactly where to look amongst the process to find exactly what you need, it can save you loads of time specific to the case that you're looking at. There's lots of cases now where through initiatives like the Transcelerate Digital Data Flow, you can get your CSP drafted, your study protocol. So making sure that it's creating the content in a structured, repeatable fashion and get all of your insights together and included. Also mentioned about the CSR generation. There was a really good case from Novo Nordisk before, where their NovaScribe solution has reduced their time creating their CSR from 12 weeks to 10 minutes, which is just an incredible amount of time and effort saved as well. How about you, Edwin?
Yeah.
What things have you got on your mind?
Yeah, building on sort of content or document creation, I think site contracts, clinical trial agreements are quite standardized documents that you could where you could utilize AI, especially with making them study specific. This is going to be a really good, huge time saver. But more from an product perspective, a couple of years ago, even before AI, it was like, hey, you need to become a developer because this is going to be an expertise and no one else can do this, so you're going to be safe. And in sort of in a blink of time, this has all been taken over by AI. So the building of these digital solutions, I've seen apps where even I can ask just a couple of questions. Can you create an app and a website with this objective and a couple of other requirements? And it's almost ready to go live, and I'm able to start a business, which is really exceptional. Obviously, within an GXP environment that we live in, it's not that's going to be that simple and fast, but yeah, we're going to be able to speed up things much quicker for sure in the development. And from an CRA monitoring perspective, no one really likes to do follow-up letters, do that administrative work. If you capture it once, AI can support you here in writing up these kind of things, the filing and so forth. So it's going to reduce the administrative burden. And I think we should consider that to be like a success. And if people are not using it, embrace it because it's going to make your life so much easier for sure. Um, a couple of successes, and we will share maybe other examples in the future as well. But what's I think key or important to understand is how do you get to that success? And my question for you now then, Farrell, is like, are you able to give a couple of examples? What's the common sort of theme in order to become successful? So what needs to be true for companies in order to utilize AI successfully?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the success isn't necessarily on the technology side. It's definitely more, for me at least, on the people and the process side. So, from a starting point of you need to have some governance in place so that you can establish a data culture, make sure that you know exactly how you're going to use it, where it's allowed to be used, and so on. And then as well, once you've got all that kind of, foundations of how are we going to use it, the other important thing to do is make sure that you're preparing people to be able to use it. So making sure you're upskilling your staff who, may never have heard of an LLM before. So teaching them what the fundamentals are, what's it going to mean to them in their
Yeah.
job, how can they use it? So making sure you're going through a good structured change management program to introduce it to their day-to-day life.
Yeah.
How about yourself, Ed?
Yeah. Yeah, so sharing the foundations or getting back to the foundations, what we're doing should be part of those programs for sure. Yeah, it's I don't know whether it's technical, but the data strategy and ensuring that the data that you use to build your AI platforms is key. We all know the saying rubbish in is rubbish out, and the data output is as good as the data you put into it. And this sounds very logic, but the data sets that companies are using were not designed with AI in mind and how to use that. So people really need to rethink how they are gathering the data, what type of data they are gathering, where they store that type of data, and so forth. So that's obviously uh, maybe not sexy and time consuming, but definitely something you need to do. And I think another sort of thing what needs to be done is that the models need to be and the process needs to continuously be validated in order to be trustworthy. And um, in sort of not these three sort of first levels of AI, but definitely if you go more to the more advanced, it can live its own life. It will start to interpret it and learn from itself. We need to be trusting that this is going into the right direction and not sort of deviating at a certain point, because if that's going to happen and we're not conscious about that, then we are at risk. So we need to be sure and that we build the right stuff. Yeah. Any
Absolutely.
other things to consider without maybe going into too much depth, Farrell, the things that we need to consider?
Sure. So I think some interesting examples is on data privacy side. So, for example, if you're working with sensitive or confidential information, you need to make sure that your organization is ring fenced or preventing sensitive commercial information to be put out there into the learning model so that nobody else is getting to
Yeah.
use your information. And there is a really funny case where at Samsung, some of their software engineers they pasted in proprietary code into ChatGPT during the early days. And obviously, that then became part of ChatGPT's training model, which means that Samsung's had a lot of exposure for that data. So you need to make sure you're setting up your own tenants and protecting your crown jewels when it comes to your company.
Yeah.
Then, not even just as part of AI, but just on the data and privacy side of things as well. Another big thing is how to work within regulations in the industry. It's normally innovation first, regulation follows. Been waiting quite a while on regulations to come through. The EU AI Act was one of the first to come out, and others are catching up. So it can be a bit of a minefield to try and navigate all of the
Yeah.
new rules that are to come, and as well some of the political challenges and nuances as well when you're introducing it to a global company, because some of these solutions have been banned in some countries. I think even Italy banned ChatGPT temporarily as part of the copyright information and issues too. So there's a lot of dynamic elements, shall we say, when it comes to these type of solutions.
Yeah.
How about
Understatement.
you, Edwin? What would you recommend to companies when they're getting started to?
Yeah, well, we're working under ICH GCP, which are the ethical standards that we need to follow. So the ethical aspects within AI are important, and the example that you gave around understanding what type of tenant you're using, we need to protect patients' data, PII information. If that gets into the wrong hands, then yeah, we've got a serious problem. So those kind of things are, yeah, I think definitely something to consider. Um, these are the things that we can probably deep dive into, maybe with a couple of experts actually, Farrell, and ask them their views or give more tangible examples to the audience that they can use and learn from whilst looking for that. Um, as a last thing, we want to close with a couple of risks, just to outline them, or areas for concerns, because we see a lot of benefits, for sure, and it's here to stay. But as a takeaway, some Are there maybe risk considerations?
Definitely. I think at the moment, medical decisions don't rely on it because you don't know whether or not it's going to be hallucinating, and you still need to, as part of GCP, rely upon the investigator giving its true assessment when it comes to medical side of things, especially to maintain that accountability to what decisions have been made along the way. Um, Other things, mentioned it before, change management. It's going to be big and scary to some people, but you need to make sure that you're putting them at ease, make sure you're training them, focus on how it's going to help their workload rather than it's, going to add on top or, even replace them, which, is one of the natural things that people will start to think. And as well, that you touched on it a bit before, but as well, how are you applying any version control to your AI if you need to apply version control? So, for example, you don't necessarily need to have a machine learning algorithm if you want to make sure that from the start of your trial to the end of your trial that you're not going to have two wildly different answers when it comes to your data and your endpoints. And then the other area that I've seen previously is that AI can be held to a higher regard than humans. So if AI is valuable if it is producing more consistently better time quality compared to a human, because ultimately that's who it's up against. So, for example, if the AI is 80% accurate, but the human baseline is about 60%, but AI is also faster, would you use that as a reason to not use AI and put up blockers to innovation, especially in a time where we need to make things faster? There's so much more data available in trials. Everything's more complex that we talked about last time. So keep innovative mindset on and open mind when it comes to these solutions.
Yeah, I think the last one is really interesting though, because people, the way it's been set into the media was like AI is going to replace you and your job. So people don't want to be replaced as well, and this sort of drives them into that direction. So I think it's also a little bit that people are a little bit scared about that, but you need to, as you rightly said, need to look at where it can help you so that you can focus on other stuff. So, but definitely. Yeah, people's concern for sure. Yeah, if I we touched upon and already on the public and private AI models that are available. Um, yeah, they're obviously concerned. I'm more worried about introducing bias in protocol writing, for example, patient selection, country selection, site selection, those kind of things. Because if you're building your protocols based on only historical data, how will you find new patients that are not in your database? How do you select new sites that can even be better in performing and selecting and recruiting patients? So yeah, we need to be careful for that. That's my biggest worry. And in general, and here in the Netherlands, it was on the news a lot that people start to stop thinking for themselves. So they fully trust on the output of AI and they don't do their own research and due diligence anymore. And that's if you sort of think through this, how that would look like in 2 or 3 generations, then people can only ask questions and can't think reasonably anymore. So that's more that's definitely too big of a problem for us to cover and to solve. But it is a worry. But in business, how we deal and with each other, you need to continue to have common sense, and you don't want to get rid of that. So yeah, that's more an concern from me, also as a father, I can say you.
Let's keep critical thinking.
Yeah, well, it's important, but you need to, that critical thinking is really important, but then you need to understand what the topic is about and these kind of things. So
Mhm.
if you lack that knowledge, you can't think critically anymore. So yeah, yeah, that's what it is. Farrell, I think we just scratched the surface of what AI is, what it can do, and I think we can spend multiple sessions around AI and take deeper dive sessions. I think definitely the whole agentic AI and AI agents is extremely interesting, and this is where um, yeah, speed and will come into place and cost savings for sure. Um, I don't think we're going to focus on that next time, though.
No, next time we're going to be taking a look at DCT enabling technologies. So we're going to be taking a high level overview of some different solutions that are becoming more critical to your clinical trial. So solutions like eCOA, eConsent, the connected devices, wearables, etc. So, if you do want to join the conversation, do give us a comment or a DM if you want. And given that you found this, you probably don't need to be told where to find it, but make sure that you are giving us a like or subscribe if you want to continue hearing the conversation as we grow and carry on. So that was Digital Health Off the Record, and I've been Farrell.
And I'm Edwin. Thank you for listening.
Thanks. Bye.
Cheers.
There